I exposed my fiancée's secret life with my best friend's help at our party, and the room watched their betrayal unfold. This way of my revenge. I thought I knew exactly who I was with. His laugh, the way he tucked his hair behind his ear when he was nervous, the little things he did without thinking, like leaving me a mug with my name on it just because he knew I'd like it. We had been together for almost 2 years, and for the most part, it felt like nothing could shake what we had. We lived in a small apartment with creaky wooden floors and a kitchen that smelled like his attempts at cooking breakfast, which were always slightly burned but somehow perfect to me. I loved those mornings, watching him scramble eggs and murmur something about the perfect toast while I sipped my coffee, hiding a smile because I already knew it would be slightly burnt, that he wasn't perfect, far from it, but I liked him exactly as he was. And I trusted him completely. Every plan we made, every weekend getaway, every night spent on the couch binge-watching shows and arguing over which movie to watch. I felt like this was my life, my world, and he was in the center of it. Then there was her, my best friend. Or at least, I thought she was. She had been there since high school, laughing at my stupid jokes, listening to my endless complaints about work, and celebrating every little win with me. I trusted her more than anyone besides him. She was supposed to be the person I could tell anything to, the person who had my back no matter what. But even in those perfect, quiet moments, I didn't realize how fragile trust could be, or how quickly everything could start to unravel without warning. The apartment smelled like coffee and the faint traces of last night's rain, sunlight spilling through the half-open blinds, casting stripes across the floor. And I thought that's how my life would always feel: safe, warm, predictable. I didn't yet know that the foundation I was standing on was already cracking, hidden beneath the familiar smells, the laughter, and the comfort I had taken for granted. I had no idea that the people I trusted the most were about to change everything in a way I could never have imagined. That I had been planning this evening for days, maybe even weeks, though I wouldn't have admitted it out loud. I wanted it to be perfect, the kind of night that would feel like it existed only for the two of us, where every little detail whispered how much I cared. I wandered through the small grocery stores near our apartment, carefully selecting ingredients for his favorite pasta, examining each tomato, each sprig of basil, as if choosing them carefully could somehow convey my love. Back at home, I unpacked the bags with meticulous attention. The kitchen smelled faintly of citrus from the lemons I had picked, mingling with the soft aroma of fresh bread. I lined up the wine glasses, polished until they caught the light in a perfect sparkle. Candles were scattered across the table and windowsill, their wax pooling gently in puddles like tiny rivers of gold. I set the flowers in a simple vase, turning each stem until the petals caught the glow just right. Every detail mattered, because every detail could communicate the affection and effort I put into this evening. As I moved around the apartment, I rehearsed little things in my head. What would I say when he walked in? How could I tell him, without making it sound rehearsed, that he meant the world to me? That I loved him in all the small, unglamorous ways that didn't always get said, but that I hoped he felt anyway? I imagined his eyes lighting up, that subtle half-smile he always gave when he felt genuinely happy, the one that made my chest tighten and my stomach flutter. I even went as far as curating a playlist, each song holding a memory we had shared: the first time we met, the trip we took to the coast, nights we stayed awake talking about fears and dreams. I imagined the way he might hum along absent-mindedly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, just as he always did when the world outside didn't matter. And yet, amid all the care and anticipation, there was a faint tug of unease, a whisper in the back of my mind, fleeting and easily dismissed, that made me glance at my phone one extra time. But I pushed it away, convincing myself that tonight was about us, about trust and love, about creating something memorable. I lit the candles one by one, watching the flickering shadows dance across the walls, poured the wine into 2 glasses, and stepped back to admire the scene. That I told myself it would be perfect. I had arranged everything to show him how much he meant to me, how deeply I cared, how much I had invested in us. If he walked in now, he would see it all: the warmth, the effort, the intimacy. And yet, the thought lingered quietly in my chest. What if the world outside our little apartment had already shifted in ways I couldn't yet see? Everything seemed normal at first. I heard the familiar click of his keys in the lock, the soft shuffle of his shoes on the apartment floor. My chest tightened in anticipation, a mix of excitement and nerves, and I smoothed the edge of the napkin on the table as if that could make everything perfect. But then, as he stepped inside, something felt off. He smiled. Yes, but it didn't reach his eyes in the same way it usually did. There was a flicker, a hesitation, a small shift in posture that made my stomach drop. He greeted me with his usual hug, but his arms were tense, and his words sounded rehearsed, almost too careful. My mind, which had been full of warmth and anticipation, suddenly started to overthink. Was it just me being paranoid? Or was something really wrong? Then my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from my best friend. Normally, her texts were harmless, cheerful, filled with jokes we shared for years. But this one was different, short, clipped, almost casual in a way that didn't match her usual tone. Can we talk later? It read. I frowned. My stomach sank. Something about the timing felt off, like she knew something I didn't that I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But as I moved around the kitchen, adding the final touches to the table, I couldn't ignore the knot in my chest. I glanced at the living room, imagining him sitting down, laughing with me, holding my hand. But now, each imagined smile felt strained. Like it might crack at any moment. I remembered little things from the past few weeks. A vague laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Phone notifications he quickly silenced. Subtle comments that didn't quite add up. Before, I had dismissed them. Now, with the romantic evening hanging in the balance, they started to form a pattern, a creeping suspicion that I didn't want to acknowledge. That I took a deep breath, telling myself I was imagining things. I poured 2 glasses of wine, the liquid catching the candlelight like molten gold. My hands shook slightly, and I wondered, was it nerves for the evening, or was something more sinister at play? The feeling of unease had a sharp edge, and for the first time in months, I realized that maybe the world I thought I understood wasn't as solid as I believed. I was wiping down the kitchen counter when my hand brushed against my phone, which I had left charging nearby. A message notification flashed on the screen. Not his, not mine, but hers, my best friend. I hadn't noticed it before, and something about the timing made my heart skip a beat. Hesitant, I unlocked the phone. The conversation opened, and I froze. There it was. Proof. Messages between her and him. My boyfriend. Words that should have never existed. Flirty, intimate, secretive. I scrolled slowly, unwilling to see more, yet unable to stop. The more I read, the heavier the air became around me. Each word felt like a knife, cutting through the trust one had built over 2 years. She had known things I didn't. And he had been lying, hiding pieces of himself I thought I knew so well. The texts weren't just innocent banter. They were plans, meetings, jokes only they could share, inside jokes I had no part in. I could feel my chest tighten, the room spinning slightly as disbelief collided with rising fury. That I sank onto a chair, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Was every laugh, every touch, every "I love you" a lie? I could almost hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent, in the silence of the apartment. Then I remembered the way he had hesitated when he came home earlier, the way she had texted so oddly. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. And I couldn't unsee it, couldn't ignore the evidence staring back at me from the screen. 1,000 thoughts crashed at once. Confrontation, revenge, shame, heartbreak. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but something inside me held me back. Not yet. I needed a plan. I needed to be in control, even if the world around me had suddenly become a battlefield of lies. The wine on the table caught my eye, the candles flickering in the dim light, and I realized something. Tonight was no longer about a romantic evening. Tonight would be the night I decided how far I would go to expose the truth, and how carefully I would watch them crumble. That I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the counter. Anger, disbelief, betrayal. They all collided in a chaotic storm inside me. How could they do this? How could the 2 people I trusted most, the ones I thought I knew completely, betray me like this? I sank onto the chair, wrapping my arms around myself as if I could hold all the pieces together. My mind replayed every memory, every shared joke, every late-night conversation. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living inside a carefully constructed illusion? one that they had been weaving behind my back. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't just from sadness. They were anger too, burning, hot, sharp. I wanted to scream, to run, to confront them right this second. But another part of me, the part that had always been cautious, strategic, whispered to wait. Watch, observe, let the truth reveal itself fully. I thought about the evening I had planned, the candles, the flowers, the food. All of it now seemed like a cruel joke. The soft music, the carefully chosen playlist. It was supposed to be our night, a moment of intimacy and love. And now it felt like a stage, with me as the unwitting audience to their deception. That I buried my face in my hands, feeling a mixture of sorrow and fury that made my head spin. I could almost hear their voices, laughing together, sharing secrets I wasn't part of. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. But amid the chaos of emotions, a spark ignited, something dark and deliberate. I wasn't going to let this go unnoticed. Not today, not tonight. I needed them to understand the gravity of what they had done, to see the consequences reflected in every detail I could control. That I took a deep, shaky breath, wiping the tears from my eyes. The evening wasn't over. And now, it would no longer be about love or celebration. It would be about revelation, confrontation, and the subtle art of revenge. That I couldn't let this slide. Not tonight, not ever. The anger simmering in my chest demanded action, but it had to be precise, calculated. I wasn't going to just shout, cry, or storm out. No, that would be too easy for them, and they deserved more than a momentary shock. They needed to feel the weight of their betrayal in a way that could never be ignored. That I sat at the kitchen table, the phone still in front of me, messages burned into my mind, and began piecing together a plan. Every detail mattered, the timing, the setting, the witnesses. I wanted the revelation to hit perfectly, to expose the lies without any doubt, and to see their reactions as I anticipated them with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. The evening's setup could be used to my advantage. Candles, music, the carefully arranged table. It could all become part of the stage. I thought about slipping subtle hints to our guests, letting them notice odd behavior without saying a word. A glance here, a carefully chosen word there. The tension would build naturally, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipation. Even before the confrontation, I visualized the moment, him laughing too loudly, her smirking slightly, thinking she was clever. And then, the reveal. Proof laid bare, undeniable. Their faces when they realized the secret was out, the stunned silence of the guests, the ripple of whispers spreading through the room. I wanted every detail to matter, every eye on them, every heart sensing the betrayal I had uncovered. At the same time, I knew I had to protect myself. I couldn't let my emotions overtake my strategy. Every movement, every word I planned to speak had to feel natural, effortless. I would remain composed, almost serene, while chaos unfolded around them. My role wasn't just to expose. They had to feel the sting of knowing they had underestimated me, that I was always one step ahead despite the intimacy they had betrayed. By the time I stood and began adjusting the candles once more, a cold clarity had settled over me. Tonight wasn't just about dinner or romance. Tonight was about truth, justice, and the satisfaction of knowing that when the moment came, I would control it entirely. The betrayal would not go unanswered, and I would make sure they understood the full extent of what they had done. I told myself it had to look accidental, like every little crack in the story showed up by coincidence. So I started sewing coincidences together, thread by thread. I texted a few close friends, casual get-together tonight. Nothing fancy, bring yourselves, and watch them bite. I didn't want everybody there, just enough faces to make the room heavy when the truth landed. Familiar eyes, sympathetic ones. The kind that would read a lie and do the math without me saying a word. I moved furniture around to create pockets where conversations would naturally form. The couch near the window for small talk. The kitchen island as the gravity point where people would gather for drinks. I set one extra seat across from the table, visible, obviously empty, like a punctuation mark that something was missing. The candles were arranged tighter, their light meant to make shadows that exaggerated expressions, to catch tears and smirks equally. Then I loaded the playlist with our songs, but tweaked the order. I kept the soft stuff early, to lower defenses, then slipped in tracks that had specific memories attached to him and her. Songs they'd referenced when they thought no one was listening. When one of those songs plays and two people who have been secretive around each other glance and smile, other people notice. That little recognition is the kind of seed that grows into suspicion. I printed a photo, one that I'd found on her social account late that night, time-stamped and candid, and slid it into a simple frame. It was casual, them at a cafe, elbows touching, the kind of image people shrug at. But I made two copies, one for myself, to hold like an anchor, and one I placed casually on the mantle where everyone would see it. If someone asked, I'd say, "Oh, it's from a friend's feed, thought it was cute," and let people look closely. Let them connect the dots. I rehearsed lines in my head until they sounded like breathing. "Hey, can I grab your drink?" I'd ask a guest who might spot the messages on my phone. I'd hand off a plate to the exact person who would later hand it to him. Little dominoes, all aimed to collide at the right moment. When he arrived, I greeted him like nothing had changed. Smile, hug, the offhand comment about how good he looked. "You smell like the coffee place," I said, and meant it and didn't. He kissed me on the cheek and murmured, "Smells great in here." My voice was steady. Inside, my pulse drummed a different rhythm. Cold, satisfied, terrified. She arrived with that easy laugh she used when the room needed light. My best friend slid in behind her, hugging people, complimenting the food. I watched them both move through the crowd like actors in a rehearsed scene. I kept my face neutral, letting the candles do the acting for me, making small gestures larger, highlighting the slightest tightening of a jaw. I checked my phone once more to make sure nothing accidental would blow the timing. Everything felt taut, a wire pulled tight between 2 points. I was ready. The plan wasn't elaborate. No vindictive spectacle, no public shaming designed to humiliate beyond repair, but it was precise. I wanted them to understand the scale of their betrayal and for the people in the room to understand it too if they snapped back at me, if they laughed it off. I had 2 more small cards up my sleeve, evidence copied to my email, and one close friend who already knew to keep an eye on the conversation. But for now, I folded myself into the evening like a hidden blade, calm on the surface. Everything sharpened underneath. They arrived together, like a single heartbeat entering the room and changing the rhythm of everything. He walked in first, same crooked grin, same sleeve pushed up slightly at the wrist, the scent of his cologne mingling with the garlic on the pasta. He looked at me like he always did, like we were the only people in the room, and for a second my plan felt cruel. I swallowed it down. This was not about mercy. She floated in behind him, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in that way that used to make me feel safe. Now I watched that touch like a scientist examining a specimen, clinical, detached. She was wearing the dress I'd helped her pick for her cousin's wedding last month, the one with the tiny clasp at the back. The light caught on her necklace and made it look like something that belonged to someone else. My chest tightened. "Hey," he said, stepping close enough to kiss my cheek. "Everything smells amazing." His voice was warm, oblivious. I handed him a plate and a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Inside, my pulse was a drum roll. Outside, the room hummed, people greeting each other, the wine being poured, a cousin telling a joke that landed and left everyone laughing. She moved through the room with practiced ease. People loved her. She knew how to turn a conversation into a little performance where everyone left feeling seen. I had once admired that about her, how she could light up a room. Tonight, her charm felt like camouflage. They sat at the table opposite me, close enough for me to see the micro-expressions that betray lying. Those tiny, involuntary flickers in the eyes, the brief lip bite when someone is trying to keep from smiling. He was talking about work, telling a story about a stupid email, and she chimed in with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. My hands were steady on the fork, but my throat felt RAW'd at 1 point. He glanced toward the mantel where I'd placed the framed photo. His eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. She noticed too and turned her head, casual, but her hand brushed his knee under the table. They shared a look, half surprise, half something else, and it was exactly the breadcrumb I'd been counting on. A guest across from them followed the gaze, squinted at the photo, and asked, "Oh, who's that?" The question landed like a match. I watched faces in the room shift. People leaned in, curiosity softening into interest. My friend Lena, who I'd texted earlier to make sure she'd ask certain questions, caught my eye and gave the tiniest nod, an arrow in a map only we two could read. The room tightened around them. The air felt charged, like a held note about to snap that he reached for his wine, and, in the motion, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, thumbed a quick reply, and then set it down again. The notification had been the kind that waves goodbye to privacy. A tiny preview and a sender's name. He didn't think anyone saw, but of course someone did. Of course someone did. I kept my voice light when I spoke, because rage shouts and ruins angles. Precision is quieter. Funny photo, I said, nodding at the frame. Looks like a fun day. My tone suggested nothing, but the room felt a seam split open. He laughed, a little off-key, while she smiled too wide and then looked away. This was the moment where their small kernel of comfort began to fracture. People who had come for cake and conversation were now collecting tiny details, shared glances, odd laughs. The framed picture on the mantel and the story I'd fed into the room started to take shape in other people's minds. My pulse slowed into a kind of focus. The plan was working. The dominoes were aligning. Now all I had to do was wait for the final push. The first nudge had to feel natural, like an accident someone else could misinterpret. I waited until dessert. Everyone's defenses softened with sugar and a second glass of wine. I reached for my phone with a calm I didn't feel and pretended to fumble it, letting the screen flip up so the lock screen popped. A notification preview from her, one of the threads I'd found earlier. Not the full conversation, just a line that would look weird out of context. Oops, I said loud enough for the table to hear, and let my hand hover. Heads turned. He glanced up, curious. She smiled at me, quick and careful, as if to smooth over whatever small stumble I'd staged. I picked the phone up and set it down casually where someone opposite could see it. Face up, notification clear. It read like a private joke, a snippet about that night, and a location he'd never been told about. It was a tiny smear of evidence, but people read between the lines. The woman across from us raised an eyebrow. That looks like a weird text, she muttered. Conversation dipped, then shifted. Someone asked, "Is that from Jenna?" And laughter that had been easy a minute ago turned slightly brittled. He tried to play it off. "Oh, that's nothing. Just work," he said, voice steady but with the tremor of someone covering. She reached for his hand under the table, a move that was meant to reassure, and instead announced complicity. I watched his fingers clench around hers and then loosen. That small squeeze told me more than words could. I let the silence hang for a beat longer than felt polite. Then I did something small and deliberate. I lifted the framed photo from the mantel and carried it to the center of the table, setting it down like a centerpiece. "It's such a nice snap," I said, eyes deliberately on them. "When was that? Last month?" It's funny how social media keeps things like that. The murmur grew. People began to look at the picture as if it might explain itself. My friend Lena chimed in with the kind of casual question I'd rehearsed. "Oh, did you two hang out that day? Looks cozy." The tone was friendly, but the intent was sharp. He laughed, too quick. "Yeah, someone posted it, just an old photo." He glanced at her, searching for reinforcement. She nodded, but her nod was delayed, just a fraction, enough to look like a practiced answer. The cousin leaned forward. "I follow her account too. Didn't realize you two were that close," she said, voice light but pointed. A few heads turned. Phones were discreetly angled to view the framed image up close. I could see the mathematics happening in people's faces. I do the math, therefore something is up. That's small. Staged clumsiness. Phone turned, framed photo moved. A gentle prompt from a friend was the first crack. It seeded doubt where comfort had been. They were forced into an improvisation, and improvisation with witnesses is where lies tend to reveal their edges. Inside me, adrenaline sang. The plan wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was about truth landing where it hurt most. In front of people whose opinions mattered, whose surprised looks would make denial harder. I kept my face serene, letting others sense the shift before I ever said the heavy words. The room warmed into low conversations, all focused now on a corner I'd carved out. Our table. He reached for his wine again. His hand trembled this time. She caught his eye and mouthed something I couldn't hear. "Not yet," I thought. Not yet. Let them unravel on their own in front of everyone. The room had changed. What had begun as a casual gathering, a celebration of food and friendship, had turned into a fragile tension, like the air before a storm. Every glance they shared, every quiet laugh, felt amplified. People noticed, though no one said much, yet. I could see it in the slight stiffening of spines, the way forks paused mid-bite, the subtle leaning in of those trying to catch whispered clues. He kept glancing at me, a mixture of confusion and caution in his eyes, and I felt a chill of satisfaction. Not cruelty exactly, but the satisfaction that comes when the first signs of exposure begin to ripple outward. He tried to mask it with humor. "You're really putting on a show tonight," he said, but his voice betrayed the tension underneath. She, on the other hand, was less composed. Her eyes darted around, catching too many reactions, noting the subtle shifts of expression. I watched her try to manage the room like a tightrope walker, leaning slightly toward him, whispering jokes, adjusting her laughter to the pitch of normalcy, but the act was fraying. Every small misstep, every delayed nod, fed the growing awareness around them that I allowed myself to sip my wine, slow and measured. My calmness was a contrast to the rising panic I saw on their faces. Internally, my thoughts raced. Every detail mattered, every second a chance to tip the scale further. I observed the micro-expressions, his subtle tightening of the jaw, the way her hand shook slightly as she reached for her glass. These tiny signals confirmed what I already knew. The house of cards was beginning to wobble. That I glanced at friends strategically seated, those I'd nudged earlier. Some were catching the cues, quietly leaning in as though piecing together a puzzle. A few whispered to each other, just loud enough for me to hear. I kept my face neutral, letting the others carry the weight of judgment. While my mind traced the path the evening would take, the candles flickered, casting shadows that made every expression sharper, every reaction more visible. The soft music in the background made the moments feel almost cinematic. I wanted the drama to be undeniable, unavoidable. Tonight wasn't about yelling or confrontation. It was about letting the truth rise naturally, like smoke from a hidden fire, so that everyone present would see the smoke before the flames appeared. And in that moment, with the tension thick in the air and the first hints of panic dancing across their faces, I knew the plan was working. Every detail I had carefully orchestrated, every subtle move, every whispered prompt, it was all converging. The storm had begun, and I was at the center, calm, composed, ready to watch everything unravel exactly as I intended. The moment had come. I had been patient, letting the tension build slowly, watching their tiny cracks widen in the presence of others. Now it was time to make the final move. I took a deep breath, letting my calm demeanor mask the storm inside. "Hey, can I borrow your phone for a second?" I asked, my tone casual but firm. He froze for a split second, just enough for everyone at the table to notice the sudden shift. She laughed nervously, trying to cover it, but the corners of her smile betrayed panic that I unlocked the phone, swiping to the conversation I had already discovered earlier. The messages sprawled across the screen like undeniable evidence. Inside jokes, secret plans, flirty exchanges. I held it up, tilting it slightly so everyone could see. The room fell silent, the hum of conversation evaporating instantly. "Care to explain this?" I said softly, deliberately looking from him to her. My voice carried calm authority, but underneath was the weight of betrayal I had been holding back. Their eyes darted, searching for an escape. He swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze that a few guests murmured, realizing what they were seeing. Someone whispered, "Oh wow." Another nodded, piecing together the fragments they had noticed all evening. I watched as recognition and shock spread across their faces, mirrored by subtle gasps and frowns. My stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with the controlled satisfaction of justice being served. He stammered. It's not what it looks like." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the lie. She tried to interject, her words tumbling over each other. But the evidence was irrefutable. Every glance, every message, every secret shared in private now lay exposed for everyone to see. That I let them struggle for a moment, savoring the tension, then spoke again. "I trusted both of you. I gave you everything, and you chose lies instead." My words were steady, but my chest tightened with anger and hurt. The room felt heavier with every passing second, filled with silent judgment from those who had come for a casual evening but were now witnesses to betrayal. And then, finally, he sank back in his chair, defeated. She reached out, but I turned my gaze away, letting the weight of their actions settle between us. The truth had been revealed, not with yelling or public humiliation, but with undeniable clarity. And I, the one they had betrayed, remained composed, standing at the center of the room. The quiet force behind the revelation, the storm had fully arrived, and there was no undoing what had been exposed. The room was thick with silence, heavier than any I had felt before. People were staring, some in shock, some whispering to each other, their eyes darting between him and her, trying to process what had just unfolded. I watched the subtle shifts, shoulders tensing, forks paused mid-air, faces pale or frozen in disbelief. Every micro-reaction was a confirmation that the truth had landed exactly as I had planned, and I felt a strange calm wash over me, despite the adrenaline still humming in my veins. My heart was beating fast, but it wasn't panic anymore. It was clarity. I had exposed the betrayal, and now I could observe the fallout. Detached, yet intimately aware of every reaction. A few guests, who had been close friends, whispered among themselves, casting cautious glances at him. I didn't know. One muttered softly, shaking her head. Another leaned in, whispering, I never would have guessed. Their curiosity and disbelief only amplified the humiliation on their faces. I could see it, the cracks widening, the forced smiles faltering. He avoided my gaze, fiddling with the edge of his napkin, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. She tried to maintain composure, but her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her wine. Every attempt to act normal failed. The tension clung to them like a shadow they couldn't shake off. Inside me, a whirlwind of emotions swirled: relief, triumph, and a lingering sorrow. I had loved them both in my way, had trusted them deeply, and yet here we were. The betrayal was laid bare, undeniable, but it had come at a cost. I could feel the ache of what had been lost, the comfort, the intimacy, the shared dreams that now seemed tainted. And yet, the satisfaction of being the orchestrator of truth was undeniable. I had controlled the narrative, set the stage, and revealed what had been hidden. Their discomfort, the whispered conversations around the room, the stunned expressions, these were the tangible results of their deception. Mirrored back at them. I leaned back in my chair slightly, taking a steadying breath, and allowed myself a moment of quiet observation. The evening had shifted completely. No one could pretend anymore. The veil of pretense had been ripped away. The truth was out, and the room had collectively absorbed it. I could feel the weight of power that came with it, the mix of sorrow, clarity, and calculated justice. Tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. The night finally began to wind down, but the atmosphere never relaxed. The party that was meant to celebrate, to bring warmth and laughter, had transformed into a subtle theater of judgment and reflection. People lingered, quietly discussing the revelations, casting glances that pierced him and her in ways words never could. I felt a strange sense of closure as I watched them. He avoided my eyes completely, slumping into his chair with the weight of exposure pressing down. She tried to maintain a veneer of composure, but her forced smile and occasional darting glances betrayed every ounce of panic and regret. The truth had not only reached the room, it had settled into every corner of it, like an undeniable stain. My own emotions were a tangled mix. Relief coursed through me, relief that the deception had been unveiled, that the lies could no longer fester in silence. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a sense of satisfaction. I had controlled the narrative, orchestrated the reveal, and ensured that they would face the consequences of their actions. As guests began to leave, many offering sympathetic nods or quiet reassurances, I realized how much this night had changed everything. Trust had been shattered, but clarity had emerged. The betrayal was no longer a hidden wound. It was a lesson, sharp and unforgettable. I knew the road ahead would be awkward, painful at times, but I also felt empowered by the knowledge that I had not been a passive victim. He muttered a low apology as we said goodbye, his words hollow and insufficient. She stayed silent, eyes downcast, as if the weight of their combined guilt could crush her. I didn't respond. I had nothing to add. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. Later, alone in my apartment, I sat with a glass of wine and let the silence envelop me. The room smelled faintly of candles and leftover food, reminders of the evening's meticulous staging. I reflected on the chaos, the revelation, the tiny dominoes I had set in motion. And though the hurt lingered, it was accompanied by a quiet strength, a knowledge that I had faced betrayal head-on and emerged with my dignity intact. The night had ended, but the lessons would linger. Trust, once broken, could not easily be mended. Lies had been revealed, and consequences had been delivered. And in the stillness of the aftermath, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. The storm had passed. I had survived, and the truth would never be forgotten.